they're also going to see some familiar faces on Washington's defense. So there's two kind of storylines here. One, you're facing a good team with a quarterback who's, I'd say, the overwhelming favorite to be Rookie of the Year.
Yeah.
Some are saying should be in the MVP conversation. Some are. That's Jaden Daniels, of course. The other side is the Commanders and the Panthers will forever be linked. There's so many front office personnel, coaches, players that have flipped from one to the other and back and forth over the last 5, 6, 7 years that they're just tied together in that way. Frankie Luvu and Jeremy Chinn start for the Commanders. That's a linebacker and a safety that was both of them were on the Panthers roster last season.
For the last several years.
Yeah, and by the way, at different times, like fan favorites.
Oh, yeah.
Frankie Luvu. I'll actually tell this story. It's a quick one. When we were at ACC tip-off for basketball, I've got a colleague that I know in Richmond radio, and he was like, hey, why don't you come on the show? So I was a guest on his show, and they obviously talk a lot of Commanders, and he brought up Frankie Luvu without – his intention wasn't to bring up like, oh, you're in Carolina, the Panthers used to have Frankie Luvu. He just brought up Frankie Luvu, and I literally stopped the interview. I was like, whoa, too soon, man. You can't talk about how excited you are for Frankie Luvu after I just had my heart ripped out of my chest and when Frankie Luvu left in free agency to go to Washington. No, we're not. What's your other question? And jokingly. But like Frankie Luvu, fan favorite. I was a big fan of Frankie Luvu. Jeremy Chinn, if you go back to preseason last year, at least one of our preseason cons, what are you most confident in, what are you most concerned about? For the Panthers, at least one of them was the versatility of Jeremy Chinn. I thought he was one of the pieces that they could unlock on defense that would allow them to face what I called all of these multiple offenses. When you have a tight end that sometimes lines up at fullback and sometimes lines up wide at wide receiver, having a Jeremy Chinn who can come into the box and stop the run and also get back into coverage and also do these other things allows you to kind of, now you're playing chess and you both have the queen on the board.
Still see a ton of Jeremy Chinn jerseys at Bank of America, by the way. A ton.
Not surprised. Now they're both playing for the Commanders. No surprise, they're doing well. I wouldn't say they're Frankie Luvu's making some real highlight plays. Jeremy Chinn's just a solid safety for Washington, starting every game, making tackles, has a forced fumble, a fumble recovery. Like he's just in a good team, a key player.
Third on the team in tackles.
So now here's the lesson learned, and I'm going to get to this more and more over the next handful of weeks. Here's the lesson learned from where the Panthers are right now, lining up across from a starting NFL safety and a stud NFL linebacker that were on your roster last year. What did the Panthers get back for those guys? They were on their roster. They're playing somewhere else. The Panthers had to get something in return, right? Not a darn thing. And that is a shame in each case for different reasons. We'll start with Jeremy Chinn. Jeremy Chinn had a little stint in the middle of the season on IR last year. So he ended up playing in 13 games. In 9 of the 13, including every game after his stint on IR, he played in less than 50% of the snaps. Sometimes got down into the low 30s. He was playing 31, 33% of snaps in a game. If you have a player that is an NFL starting safety caliber, as he's proving this year, and as he had proved previously with the Panthers, and you're playing him 30, 40% of the snaps, and you're on a team that's not in the playoff race, matter of fact, you were on the way to being the worst team in the NFL, and you can't even say you were tanking because you didn't own your first-round pick, you were just the worst team in the NFL, and you're not playing Jeremy Chinn, it is negligent to not move that player. Because whatever you can get back, someone will pay for a starting safety. Whatever you can get back. You're not playing him. Let him go play somewhere else. Get a pick. I don't care if it's a 5th. I don't care if it's a pick swap. Get something back so right now he's not playing against you and you didn't get anything for him leaving. Frankie Luvu is a different one because and this developed as the day went on. The point I was intending to make when I first took notes on this segment was Frankie Luvu is making roughly the same amount per year as Jadeveon Clowney. So the Panthers went out and signed a not super long-term, we call it a medium-term free agent deal to a veteran who is on the back half of their career for about $10 million a year. Why not give that $10 million a year to Frankie Luvu, who is a little bit younger? Obviously, Jadeveon Clowney hasn't produced this year the way you'd hope. Frankie Luvu would have probably had more sacks with the quarter of the pass rushing reps. So that was the point I was going to make. And then, in talking with Dennis pre-show, he's like, there were some reports out there, some rumors that the Panthers actually did offer Frankie Luvu a similar deal, or maybe even a tad bit more.
Even more, yeah. They tried to re-sign him.
That right there is the issue. If you have a player on an expiring deal, part of your job as a front office executive is to see how realistic it is that player will re-sign with you. And if it came down to like, oh, we would sign with you if you give the best deal, that's fine. Then you go into it. And then if in the offseason, the Texans or the Commanders come out of the sky with a Godfather, 1.5 times as much per year deal, you go, darn. Like, he wanted to come back, but yeah, it's life-changing money. Can't do anything about that. But if you go into an offseason and you're offering the same deal or maybe even a little more, and that player chooses to go elsewhere, that's where you have to have a better relationship with the agent. That's where you have to have a better relationship around the league to understand that your player doesn't want to be there. And as soon as they get the option to leave, they will. So before they get the option to leave, you trade them and get something in return. You can't, how many players, honestly, just truth serum, how many players on the Panthers defense do you think start for a division leader elsewhere? There aren't many.
Derrick Brown if he's not hurt.
Probably J.C. Horn.
Yeah.
Maybe one or two others depending on the defense that they're going to.
Sure.
You had two of them last year. They left and you got nothing in return. That's letting value, that's letting assets walk out the door. So where's that lesson getting you now? By the way, I completely acknowledge Scott Fitterer was the one that made those mistakes. Mm-hmm. He was the GM last year. It's a new regime. However, you can learn from the old regime's mistakes and make sure you're not repeating them. Learn from the history. Who's on an expiring deal this year? Chuba Hubbard, Deontay Johnson, Andy Dalton. On the defense, I'm sure there's at least a handful of them. Go and make sure you don't get Luvu'd or Chinned this offseason. If you have a starting caliber player that you don't anticipate playing, like you had with Chinn, send him somewhere else. If Adam Thielen comes back and you are so dead set on your young receiving core that you don't see him on the field in 2 or 3 wide receiver sets because you want Deontay Johnson, Xavier Legette, those guys to dominate the catches, don't let Adam Thielen just chill on the sideline. Send him somewhere he'll get on the field. Get something back, unlike you did with Chinn. If you talk with Chuba Hubbard, by the way, Chuba Hubbard, I would argue, very, very similar on the opposite side of the ball to Frankie Luvu. Because last year, on a bad team, Frankie Luvu looked good. He was like the one thing on a team that's like, hey, he's actually making a bunch of tackles, making a bunch of sacks. He seems to be a player that embodies the culture they want to build. Look at this. Everybody loves Frankie Luvu. What could you say about Chuba Hubbard right now? He's on a bad team, but he's the one player that's being productive, picking up yards, and he seems to embody the type of culture they want to build. You better get a real heart-to-heart with Chuba Hubbard and say, listen, Chuba, if the market value comes back that you are a $5 million a year player and we offer you $5 million a year, will you re-sign with us? And you better talk to his agent, and you better get the real answer. Because next year, if he's playing for name your team against you, even though you may have offered the same or more money than that team he's playing for, you will have lost him for absolutely nothing, and it would have been avoidable if you had better information midseason before the trade deadline. The Panthers more so than other teams, can't afford to let value walk out of their facility. And this weekend is a good example. I would not be surprised if Frankie Luvu doesn't get Andy Dalton on the ground and then looks over at Jero Evero or Dave Canales or Dan Morgan or whoever and just get. I wouldn't even. He's not going to point to him. He's not full Kirk Cousins. You like that? He's like a smirk, just a little wink, a little knowing nod. Jeremy Chinn, you didn't even play me. Now I'm over here. Look at this.
I think for Luvu, he didn't want to play in Evero's system. Like he wanted to play in a 4-3.
And to me, you can find that out.
Yeah.
You can find that out before the trade deadline last year. And how many contenders wouldn't have loved to have Frankie Luvu on there for the stretch run?
Oh, yeah.
You might have gotten a third rounder for him.
Maybe.
Conditional third. Right? A fourth that could turn into a third if he gets 5 sacks, which he would have because he's really good.
Chinn was hurt that midpoint of the year right around the trade deadline, so I can see why he wasn't. Because teams would be afraid.
Yes, and I thought of that as well. The last 2 games before the injury, he played less than 40% of the snaps.
Yeah. And that's something I've griped on with Evero. It's like, dude, you had a dude, and you didn't use him. Like,
if it truly was just the injury, I wouldn't be as mad as I am. I don't think it was. Mm-hmm. I think he fell out of the system priority somehow, and they just didn't even think of taking advantage of that on the trade market. But again, that's the old GM, Scott Fitterer. Mm-hmm. Dan Morgan learned from the mistakes of the old GM. Don't be doomed to repeat them, and make sure you're not letting value walk out of your franchise because, quite frankly, your team's not good enough.